maybe there's something to what Vernon said. I have seen and heard strange things in the house, but I can't imagine anything going this far. Do you think someone could be trying to make you think something is happening in your house? Mark asked. Peter sat up straight and looked directly at Mark. He then replied, "That's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought about things that way before. I suppose some of the things I have experienced could be explained that way, if someone was really trying to fool me. But there have been things that have happened where I know I'm the only one in the house. So again, I guess I still don't know what's going on. Do you know of anybody that may be angry with you or possibly Sarah?" Mark asked. Peter paused for a moment, shook his head, and replied, "No, we have not been around here long enough to upset people that much, right?" "Well, it may not take long to make someone angry, but then again, unless they are visibly angry you may not know it," Mark commented. As he nodded his head in agreement, Peter said, "Yeah, that's true. I just can't imagine anyone getting upset enough to try to trick me, and could they have done anything to Sarah?" Peter said, looking down at the floor. He brought his hand to his mouth as he thought about Sarah again. Mark sighed, "We don't have any answers yet, but we'll go over this house thoroughly and then let you know if we need your input again. So you have enough from me now, I take it?" Peter asked. "Yeah, we have more to do here and we'll take it from there, okay?" Mark replied. "Okay with me. I'll let you know if I can think of anything else that will help too," Peter added. "Be sure to do that. This is a strange one so far." "Thanks, Peter," Mark said, beginning to stand up. As Peter stood up as well, then replied, "Thank to you too, Mark." Mark turned and walked toward the front door to go back inside of the house. Peter headed to the porch steps. As he walked down the steps, he noticed a few neighbors still watching Vernon's house. He avoided making eye contact. Ducking under the yellow police tape to reach the sidewalk, he continued heading back to his house on the sidewalk. As he walked, he realized he heard the faint voices of two young girls, between 7 and 8, sitting on the lawn next door to his. They were facing each other and were patting their hands together in various rhythmic patterns while signing what he recognized to be old nursery rhymes. When he reached the front walk to his house, the two girls start chanting the nursery rhyme Peter, Peter Pumpkin Eater. For some reason, he found himself listening to the words more intently than he ever done before. His feet began to feel heavy as the meaning of the words sank in. Slowly he turned his head toward the two girls, and his jaw dropped as they completed the rhyme. He stood motionless staring at the two girls. One of the girls noticed him and looked back at him. The other turned toward him as well. The one who noticed him first asked, "Are you all right, mister?" The question brought Peter back, and he replied, Yeah. I just was admiring you singing." The same girl replied, "Thanks, mister. I hope they find your wife." The other girl agreed, "Yeah." Peter managed to take a quick breath and reply, Thanks, girls." He faced his porch and continued walking toward it. He felt himself trembling as he reached the steps. Using the railing, he guided himself up to the porch. He could not look back at the two girls. At the front door, he paused for a moment and closed his eyes for a moment. After opening them up again, he reached for the door handle, pushed the door inward, and walked into the foyer. After closing the door behind him, he leaned his back up against it. His eyes stared blankly toward the stairs as his mind swirled with the lines of the nursery rhyme repeating over and over. What did it mean? Did it mean anything for him? His heart was beating strong enough to create a pulsating sound in his ears. He was not able to answer the questions racing through his mind. Was there anything meant by a pumpkin shell? Maybe it was nothing and he was getting worked up for nothing. He knew he would need some time to think about the new questions before he could determine whether they meant anything or not. Maybe looking in the office would lead to more information. He opened his eyes again, pushed himself away from the door, and began walking toward the rear of the house to the office. He paused for a moment when he noticed the office door being shut. Since he could not remember if he had shut it before, it likely was something he did himself. He tried to push the door open into the room. For some reason, it seemed very difficult to push, as if something was leaning against it. It did open after he leaned into it and forced it open. When he could see what was blocking it, he saw that the door had a clear path to swing into the room. Confused again, Peter just shook his head and continued into the room. He took a seat in the office chair. After another sigh, he picked up one of the folders from earlier. He pulled out another newspaper clipping to review. After scanning it for a moment, he realized it was another photo of Matthews. He was posing in front of the furnace store. Peter focused uneasily on Matthew's image. The almost crazed eyes appeared to peer their time again, and directly at Peter. Very unnerved with the photo, Peter set the clipping down on the desk. Looking out the window to his right, he managed to calm down again after about a minute. Looking back at the clipping, he tried to focus on other objects in the photo. The storefront was relatively small, but that was all that may have been needed for the service-based business. A partial view of Matthew's truck was parked in front of the store. It was a very old stake truck with what looked like large metal plates propped against the sides. A few large metal bottles appeared to be tied to the sides as well. Peter believed they may have been welding equipment. Still puzzled, he set the clipping aside, opened the accordion file again, and pulled out another stack of news clippings. He spent a fair amount of time reviewing the articles, but did not find anything that he felt would really help find Sarah or what happened to Vernon. His stomach growled slightly, and he decided to find some lunch before deciding what to do next. He stood up and turned around. The office door was shut. He knew that he did not shut it. As he stared at the closed door for a moment, the room seemed to darken for some reason, even with daylight coming through the window. Perhaps the sun was going behind a cloud. He could almost sense something was about to happen. It continued to darken in the room. Feeling very uneasy, he started to tremble. Or was it something else trembling? Soon he started to hear the glass globe in the wall sconce vibrating as well as other things hanging on the wall. His chest began to tighten as if something was pressing against it. The sound and vibration did a crescendo for a moment, then abruptly stopped. The pressure on his chest was no longer there either. He was unsure of what just happened. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Still wanting to leave the room, he stepped to the door. As he pulled the door open, he realizes it was much easier to open. He swung it back and forth a few times to test it. Not able to figure out what happened earlier, he just propped the door aside and walked into the hall toward the kitchen. Looking at the clock in the kitchen, he noted that it was close to lunchtime. Despite still feeling somewhat uneasy, he decided he would get something for lunch. He walked over to the refrigerator and opened it to see what was inside. After lunch, Peter first thought about returning to the office to do some more research, but he had second thoughts. As he set the dishes in the sink, he remembered the pressure on his chest and everything shaking. To him it was like someone, or something did not want him in there. His breathing started to increase when he remembered that Sarah spent a fair amount of time in the office trying to find some kind of clues before she disappeared. Maybe she found something she was not supposed to find. If there was something in the office, what was it? He could not think of anything that serious in the items he had examined. He did find out information on the previous owners, but nothing that stood out in his mind as enough to cause some type of curse. Was there actually a curse on the house like Vernon said? He just closed his eyes again as the questions went through his mind. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly in an attempt to calm down. Wanting to do something to ease his mind, he decided to watch some television for a while. He took one more deep breath. After tapping the edge of the sink 2 times, he turned and began heading toward the living room with the television. Peter was unable to gain the confidence to return to the office. It was dark as he finished a simple dinner. As he sat at the kitchen table, he stared at the few remaining sandwich pieces he made for dinner. It hit him how things had really changed for the worse since Sarah disappeared. He had been excited to move to Wharton, but since she disappeared, the excitement had disappeared as well. All the reasons for moving here now seemed so trivial. He got to live in a small town with a good job. The job, he had been so sidetracked lately, he barely thought about his job. As he thought about the returning to work, he had no idea when he would be ready to start again. The thought of being cheerful and trying to sell houses to people still seemed something too difficult for him to try. He picked up the plate and silverware, stood up from the chair, and walked to the sink. He set the plate and silverware into the sink along with the lunch dishes, which had not been washed either. Feeling very tired, he walked out of the kitchen toward the foyer. Pausing at the front door, he peered out of the window toward the street in front of Vernon's house. The police and sheriff cars were no longer parked in front of his house. They must have finished up for the day at least, he figured. He walked away from the door and headed toward the stairs. Slowly he made his way up the steps using his hand on the railing to aid his climb. The treads creaked with each step. He felt numb to the sound as he continued to the second floor. At the top of the stairs he slowly walked around the open hallway to the bedroom. He opened the bedroom door and pushed it into the darkened room. After turning on the light, he paused briefly. He shook his head, realizing he did not feel like washing his face or anything. He just wanted to go to bed. After a brief pause, he went to the dresser to find something to wear to bed. Peter stirred from a deep sleep later that evening. His head felt unbalanced and his stomach was upset. Through his clouded mind he could hear what sounded like Sarah. Trying to focus and listen closer, he could hear Sarah saying, "Peter, come down here quick." It was muffled, as if she was in the basement. He was puzzled since her voice does not seem distressed. As he rolled over and began to swing his feet off the bed, he became aware that he really felt drunk. Fighting the dizziness, he managed to stand up along the side of the bed. He headed straight to the partially open door and pushed it fully open. Feeling as if he did not have any control, he watched as he staggered into the hallway. The stairway light was on, and he made his way around to the stair landing. He supported himself by using both hands to keep his balance. Stumbling to the top of the stairs, he ran into the wall along the stairs. Stunned for a moment, he shook it off and continued down the steps. He slowly staggered down the steps. One hand was on the railing and the other on the opposite wall. He continued to feel unbalanced as he neared the bottom of the stairs. His vision was blurry. Something caused him to pause for a moment as he reached the foyer. The light in the foyer faded. Through his distorted vision, he could see a dark grey vaporous form entering the room from all around. It seemed to be surrounding him. At first he thought he was spinning, but he realized it was the grey smoke-like mass which was swirling around him. It soon closed in on him and engulfed him, blocking out the light from the rest of the room. The swirling cloud was intense. He tried to fight as he could feel it starting to spin him around and lift him off the ground. His arms flailed and his feet attempted to kick at whatever force had him in the uncontrollable spin. It had no effect on whatever was attacking him. Sharp pains could be felt in his forearms as something scratched him as he resisted. He gasped for breath as it seemed like the room did not have enough air. A loud bang filled his ears along with a vertical rectangle of grey light that he could see as he spun around. The swirling began to slow. He realized the rectangle was the open front door. At a certain point the swirling was no longer strong enough to keep him suspended in the air, and he dropped violently to the floor. The combination of being impaired and the dizziness of being spun around took its toll, and his consciousness faded. He abruptly woke up in bed in a drenching sweat and his heart pounding. It dawned on him that his mind has just relived what happened the Saturday morning Sarah disappeared. As he sat in bed breathing heavy, he tried to think what the dream meant. If it was true, it meant that he was not the one that did anything to Sarah. Unfortunately, it did not tell him what happened to Sarah, however. The only new information was that she had been downstairs and wanted him to come see something. Not knowing what to look for downstairs, he decided there was not much he could do. After a few minutes, he was able to calm himself down. He decided to go to the bathroom, splash some cold water on his face, and then try to get back to sleep. He turned the sheet to the side and slid his legs off the bed. After a sigh, he stood up and headed toward the bathroom. Peter was able to sleep again. As he slept soundly, his dreams were not nearly as intense as before. A sound startled him awake. Groggy, he opened his eyes and he tried to focus on the source of the sound he heard. As he propped himself up, he could hear a woman's voice again. His heart sunk as he recognized the voice as Sarah's. Focusing intently on the voice, he heard it again, and could tell that she was saying, "Peter." A few moments later he could hear her saying, "Help me." With his heart thumping loudly within his chest, he dropped his legs to the floor. He tried to control his breathing enough to focus on her voice. Walking toward the bedroom door, the floor squeaked loud enough to almost obscure Sarah's voice. He tried to lighten his steps. He stopped for a moment to listen to her voice saying, "Help me." To him, the voice seemed to be traveling through the large heating grate in the wall, not too far from the bedroom door. He opened the bedroom door and walked into the hallway. He turned on the hallway lights before walking further into the hall. In the hallway he could still hear Sarah's voice drifting up from the stairway below him. Recognizing that the voice was at least coming from downstairs, he quickened his pace as he made his way around the railing to the top of the stairs. Continuing to keep a hurried but cautious pace, he began to walk down the steps. Sarah's voice echoed from somewhere below. Using his ears as a guide, he walked past the stairway, down the hallway to the kitchen. At this point, he realized where he needed to go, the basement. As he circled around through the kitchen, his pace slowed. Sarah's voice continued to cry out to him, but he could also make out the sounds of other voices. At least one or two other women and maybe a man's voice as well. All were in distress as Sarah's voice was. Peter was very puzzled as he approached the basement door. Very uncertain what he would find, but wanting to do anything to help Sarah, he reached for the knob to the basement door and he began to slowly pull it open. A chill swept over him from the pitch-black basement. It seemed very cool, if not cold. The basement was usually cool, but this was more than he remembered. Not knowing what to expect below, and the unusually cold air caused Peter to tremble. His trembling hand moved toward the light switch inside of the doorway. The air past the doorway felt much cooler to him than the air in the hallway. After moving the switch, the two incandescent bulbs cast a yellowish light into the basement below. For some reason, the lights appeared restricted and the room seems only a slight improvement from pitch black. Still hearing voices below, he took a deep breath and then exhaled. He slowly started down the stairs. Gripping the railing as he carefully continued down the stairs, he stayed alert, realizing there could be someone or something down there, other than just the voices he was hearing. About halfway down the steps, he stopped as the thought occurred to him that the voices could have been in his head. He was not hearing them at the moment. What if they were not in his head, though? He felt he needed to continue, so he did. The treads creaked as his weight was transferred with each step. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, he carefully listened for sounds to see if he could determine where they were coming from. Some of the voices had tapered off before he started walking down the steps. Hoping to hear more, he waited patiently at the bottom of the stairs. While waiting, the chill from the room caused him to rub his hands together for warmth. He commented, "Wow, it's so cold down here." After nearly a minute of waiting, Sarah's voice was the next voice he heard. It sounded like it was coming from his left, from somewhere near the furnace. He walked in front of the furnace slowly, then walked between it and the workbench. As he peered behind the furnace, he could not see anything strange other than a few odd shadows. Confused, he stared at the area between the furnace and the steel plate wall behind it. Another woman's voice appeared to come from behind the steel plating. Wanting to listen closer, Peter quietly walked behind the furnace and placed his right ear against one of the larger steel panels. As he leaned against the wall, it moved inward slightly. Startled, he pulled back and stared at it for a moment. He then used his hand to push against the large steel plate. It was heavy, but it swung inward to reveal a pitch-black and very cold room. A spider web stretched near the top of the panel and then broke. Staring into the room for a few seconds and moving his head to the right and left, did not reveal any details of what was inside. He needed more light. Remembering the flashlight on the workbench, he stepped away from the newly found room and walked to the workbench. The flashlight was where he had left it earlier. He retrieved it and turned it on. The beam was weak and only cast a narrow yellowish-orange beam. Shining the light behind the furnace onto the rusty orange steel plates caused him to pause for a moment. As he did, he could hear the nursery rhyme, "Peter, Peter Pumpkin Eater," again in his mind. His jaw dropped slowly and his open widened when he thought about the pumpkin shell part as he stared at the pattern of the rusty orange steel plates, with the now open secret door. His heart pounded as he inched toward the pitch-black room. He had to duck slightly to enter the room. His forehead brushed up against some of the spider web that had broken near the top. Soon after clearing the path of the door, his left foot kicked something. He shined the light downward, and he could see the floor of the room was covered with lumps of coal. This must have been the old coal bin for the gravity furnace before it was converted to gas, he guessed. As he stood in the room for a moment, he realized he could almost see his breath as it passed into the cold air. He shined the light to his left. The beam passed over what appeared to be old tattered clothing covered in dust strewn atop the coal. He guided the beam along the clothing until it revealed a mummified face. Shocked but curious, he moved closer to see if he could see enough detail to recognize the body. The head appeared to be partially crushed just above and behind the left ear. From the hair coloring and features, the head appeared to him to appear like Mildred's husband Oliver. Lifting the light slightly upward, he found another body strewn alongside Oliver. He quickly recognized the second body as Mildred's. Moving the beam off to the left of Mildred's body, he saw more bodies lying prone on the coal remaining in the abandoned bin. Looking at the disfigured and decaying faces, he recognized more of the remains as Russell and Clara Hanford. Absent was the smell of decaying flesh. This could possibly be due to the frigid state of the basement and maybe the coal, he thought to himself. Trembling from the sights before him, he panned the flashlight to his right. Another body came into view in the narrow pattern of the flashlight. The sight of the newer clothes on the body caused him to shake almost uncontrollably as he recognized that it was the nightgown Sarah wore the night she disappeared. In the left hand of the body, there was a flashlight still clutched tightly, but dark. When his flashlight shined to reveal her face, his trembling hands dropped his flashlight. It landed with a thud against the coal on the floor. The light flickered briefly, but remained on in its weakened state. Overcome with grief, he dropped to his knees and stared toward Sarah's body. The uneven coal lumps pressed sharply into his knees. After a minute or so, the pain made him more aware of his surroundings. Still trembling, he slowly reached for the flashlight on the floor. After picking it up, he shined it toward Sarah's face again. Like the others, her skull was crushed as well. He shifted the flashlight beam beyond Sarah to reveal another older-appearing decayed body. This time it was a male sitting against the wall. The body has a pistol still clutched in the hands and a large concave hole in the chest where the heart was. He began to recognize the leathery face as resembling the images he had seen of Matthias. As Peter shined the light toward the face, the black sunken eye sockets gazed blankly toward him as the eyes in the one photo Peter had found of Matthias. Everything started to sink in as he panned the flashlight around to survey the scene. Several people had perished in this room. Trembling as he clutched the flashlight, he began to stand up from his knees. The metal door groaned as it swung, and the light entering from the basement faded to nothing. The loud slam stopped Peter in his tracks. The flashlight dropped from his hand and the light went out. Total darkness surrounded him as he remained motionless and stunned. From behind, it almost sounded as if one of the bodies was stirring. A stern male voice with a German accent said, "Anyone who tries to take my liquor from me shall perish." With a sharp blow to the back of the head, Peter collapsed to the ground on top of what he believed may be Sarah's body. Only a few moments later, the intense pain hit him. The warm blood from the fresh wound began to pass through his hair and partially onto his neck. As his consciousness started to fade, in the darkness he could see a grey form standing before him. It was Sarah. She motioned to him to come toward her. Somehow he was able to rise and walked toward her. As they stood together in the pitch-black room, he realized he was not seeing a light to guide them.